All right, music fans, welcome back. Harmless Dave here, talking real music in real time for some real people out there, just like you, just like me. So another sad day in music as Genesis and Phil Collins say goodbye. It's crazy. It's the year 2022. And I guess, if you're back in the 1980s and you're thinking to yourself, yeah, I think Genesis, they'll probably keep going till about 2022. You'd be just thinking, nah, probably not. They'll probably be done by the year 2000 because that's when the apocalypse is supposed to happen, Y2K and all that, remember? But it's just tragic. I think Genesis over the years probably could have hung together more, especially in the 90s. And, there was a period of time where they were kind of off without Phil Collins for a little while, if you remember that. And Phil was still cranking out solo albums and was still quite impactful, at least on some radio formats, right up until about 2003, which is fairly remarkable. But Phil Collins gives this very eloquent speech, about 2 minutes long. It's on YouTube, and basically saying, this is it. Thanks for the memories and so forth. And what was really kind of almost symbolic is that everybody leaves the stage at the end, and Phil is there on his own with his cane, and he's basically the last man standing and hobbling off the stage, which was very symbolic, but also illustrates what kind of health Phil Collins is in. It's amazing that he got through this tour. Vocally, he doesn't sound all that bad. There are some moments that you'll hear and you go, okay, that's not like the song, or something's up with Phil's voice here, but nobody really cared all that much. What people cared about was seeing this band and Phil Collins performing. And I think everybody knew it really is the last domino. Wasn't a question mark. It was for real. Now, Phil Collins left the door open just a little bit because he said, it's the end of Genesis. He never said it's the end of, him, but I can't imagine that he would go out and do a solo tour or anything. But crazier things have happened unless somebody can help him, and so he can be more functional on stage. And it doesn't look good. His health just isn't that good. He looks very frail, but he's a trooper. And it's just, when you remember Phil Collins, you remember this guy who was everywhere. And, he worked with like Robert Plant for a while when Plant started his solo career, worked with Eric Clapton during the 80s, worked with David Crosby at one point, which was really cool. He's had some excellent collaborations. I know I'm forgetting. There's just so many. Was it Marilyn Martin and Earth, Wind and Fire dude there, Philip Bailey? I mean, the guy's just, he was everywhere during the 80s. Played drums on No One Is to Blame by Howard Jones. That's Howard's only #1 song. And it's a great drum part. The thing about Phil Collins during the 80s is you knew it was Phil. He has this very distinctive playing style. And we were really introduced to that in the early 80s with those Genesis records. And what a pivot Genesis made from being sort of this quirky, proggy band. And there are a lot of people out there that prefer the Peter Gabriel version of Genesis. I gotta say, I prefer the Phil Collins version of Genesis. I mean, they're both in the band at one point, and that's really cool. But what's cool is the pivot they made, starting on probably the album, and then there were 3, which again signified there were 3 guys now in the band. But Follow You, Follow Me was a pretty big song. You don't hear it anymore, but it was just a breakthrough kind of song for the band. And I think there's another song on there called Down in the Motherlode or something like that. That's really cool with the keyboards, and it's transitioning, it's moving the band toward what they would become in the 1980s, which was this slightly proggy, but fairly accessible mainstream band, and with Collins singing and some great guitar parts and great keyboards, this became a very interesting band. And these guys, I think on the Shapes album, I would have to say, achieved something very few bands can achieve, and that is one amazing song after another with no filler. They're all interesting, they're all distinctive, and some are obviously more pop oriented and some are more FM rock radio friendly material, but you know, it's all amazing. Some people say Land of Confusion is really good. I tend to like the Shapes album the best, and Abacab too is just a beast, amazing record for me. I mean, that's when I really embraced Genesis, was on Abacab, because that title track alone was just the perfect rock radio song. It was late night, put that on next to like Twilight Zone by Golden Earring, and you got some good late night creepy driving music and ear candy going from speaker to speaker. Yeah, that's what I loved about Genesis. And they continued into the early 90s, and they still put out really great material. And then, you know, the wheels started coming off the bus, and then it was timed just as the music industry kind of went in the direction it was going. So in a way, you know, the whole Genesis thing probably wouldn't have worked anymore anyway, because rock radio would have been like, yeah, no, we're not playing these guys. It's too melodic. You know, and even though they were kind of quirky and sometimes very progressive, it didn't matter. Rock radio needed guys that all sounded like Cookie Monster or Oscar the Grouch or whatever. I mean, I've used that analogy and people are like, what? I'm like, that's kind of what they all sounded like during the 90s. And even today, that vocal style, I mean, Phil Collins compared to that, come on. Can't have Phil Collins. That's cheesy, right? So it's kind of a sad ending to an absolutely brilliant and amazing career. Peter Gabriel, by the way, was in the audience for this last Genesis show. Why didn't someone bring him up on stage? Why didn't they say, hey, Peter, come on up here? You know, I'm sure they didn't have a song in their set list that Peter could have participated in, but I'm sure they could have done some improv and figured it out. But that's pretty cool that Peter Gabriel was there as kind of like a testimony to just how great that band was and is. And I think they're all done unless, you know, they go into the studio and create something, which I would say there's probably a low percentage chance of that happening, but never say never in the music business. And maybe Phil will find the miracle cure to some of the things that are ailing him. You know, I'm thinking that money probably isn't an obstacle, especially after this tour. If Phil Collins wanted to do some therapy or some treatments, I don't know. I'm not him, so I don't know. Maybe he's explored every option there is. And there just comes a time where everybody has to admit that in certain situations, there's not much he can do about it. But John Mayall, who called it quits pretty much on the same evening, is 88 years old. So you just never know. I know a lot of it has to do with genetics and attitude and so forth, but he has a whole bunch of things going on, Phil Collins, and I think I documented that in a video I did last week, and it's just really sad. So in any event, for all you Genesis fans out there, Phil Collins fans, that's it. That's all, folks. That's all she wrote. So all we can do is, you know, go back and listen to the music. These live performances, a lot of them are on YouTube and you can watch them. Some of it for me is kind of painful to watch, and I've said that, but the spirit of the band is there, and the fans are enthusiastic, and they're watching the end of a very historic run for a rock band that started way back, I think, in the late 60s, from what I remember. And just an amazing group, especially for people who grew up in the 80s listening to Genesis, late 70s into the 80s and into the early 90s as they evolved and progressed, but just one of a kind, very unique sound. And certainly I can pretty much say with a lot of accuracy that this stuff, this kind of music, probably not going to come back. So celebrate it, love it, and remember it. All right, folks, that's the video. I'm done. More coming up soon, so stay tuned to the RMO channel.